Hi everyone, and welcome to this launch for Moonflight. I'm Liz Cross. I'm the Managing Director of David Fickling Books, and we're so delighted to be the publishers of Moonflight. Just before I start, I just want to say if you can hear a little background noise behind me, many apologies. I'm actually at the Centre for Literacy and Primary Education, where we've just had a live launch for Candy Gourlay's new book, Wild Song, and the guests are just leaving, so there might be a little bit of noise, so apologies. And actually, Candy's doing an event with Nikki on Friday, I believe. So if you'd like to hear, Candy's had some amazing stuff to say, so if you'd like to hear any of that, do sign up for that one too. But today, obviously, is all about Moonflight, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome you to this launch. Moonflight by Gill Lewis, with such wonderful illustrations by Pippa Curnick. And this is a really special launch for me. Gill and I have worked together for more than 10 years. And I counted up how many books, and Gill, you might be surprised to hear this. I think this might be our 15th book together. And I've loved each and every one of the books we've worked on. They're all wonderful. But Moonflight is something different from any of the others, and it's a rich and splendid and thrilling book that I think has got every chance of becoming a future classic that will be read and loved for years to come. In this book, Gill has brought all her trademark skills of telling a story with heart and meaning, of creating characters that speak to our hearts, and of bringing us to the end of the story filled with hope and inspiration. And that's one of the things that I've always thought Gill does better than any other writer writing now. She just fills our hearts at the end of the book. But in setting this book in an animal fantasy world, in the world of the Dockland rats, she stepped into a different arena too, and given herself the opportunity to create a whole vibrant, entrancing, wholly convincing world. One of the things I love most about Moonflight is how it's filled with utterly delicious elements. There's a cursed diamond, a reluctant hero, a puzzle handed down through generations, an amazing flying machine, and so much more. It makes for an absolutely thrilling story. But as I say, the pace and excitement of the story are never at the expense of the characters or of the huge emotional impact of the story. And like every book that Gill writes, at the heart of the story are things that matter to Gill and that matter to all of us. In this case, things about bravery, about loyalty, about corruption, and above all, about truth. It's a book that carries you along on a fun, thrilling ride, but as I say, that leaves your heart full at the end. And at DFB, we could not be prouder to be publishing it. I can't wait to hear Nikki and Gill talking about the book. I know they're going to have so much interesting stuff to say. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to them. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Liz. So that teacher that got in touch with me and said that Liz Cross has really interesting things to say was absolutely right. What a fantastic introduction to that book. And we're going to be revisiting some of the things that you've talked about. So I'm going to introduce Gill in just one moment. I'm Nikki Gamble from Just Imagine, and I'm delighted to be hosting this event with a writer, Gill Lewis, who I hold in very, very high esteem, and to be celebrating the publication of Moonflight. If you haven't attended one of our events via Eventbrite before, just a few quick words on how it's going to work. I've opened the chat, which means that you can introduce yourselves if you want to. You can make a connection with other people who are at the event, joining in yourself this evening. But please don't add questions to the chat. We have a Q&A facility, and I'll be opening that partway through my conversation with Gill. So you will have that opportunity to ask the burning questions that you have. So you'll see it'll pop up on your screens when the Q&A is open, and I'll also tell you. We're going to have a wonderful evening. So with a fair wind behind us, we're ready to set sail with Tilbury and to welcome Gill Lewis. Hi, Gill.
Hi, Nikki, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited about tonight. Thank you.
And how are you today? Have you had a good day?
I've had a really lovely day, actually. I started the day off bodyboarding on White Sands Beach, and then I went for some fish and chips. So that was quite a nice day.
We'll come back to that maybe a little bit later, your adventurous spirit. But before we do that, Gill, readers who know your books and have perhaps come to know you primarily as a writer of realistic nature stories. And they may be surprised that you've written a book in the fantasy, adventure genre, featuring clothes-wearing anthropomorphic rats. But on closer reading, and when our audience get the chance to read the book themselves, they'll see that there are many connections actually with your other books, even though they may be in a different genre. So to begin, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about Moonflight, how it came to be written, and how you think it relates to your previous books.
Yes, well, Moonflight has the common theme that it's about animals, it's about rats. But as you say, highly anthropomorphized. They're wearing clothes, they're talking to each other like humans do. And in some ways, it differs from my other books. But it was a story actually which was inspired during lockdown. And if you can sort of wind our minds back to those rather frightening sort of times when we were told to stay in our houses and we were only allowed to go out for half an hour, exercise each day, and have to go back to our houses. And it was that feeling of claustrophobia and uncertainty as well, I think. And I think I just wanted to go on an adventure. And I wanted to go on an adventure in writing. And so this story started out as just going into the unknown of the imagination, just setting out on a journey. And I didn't really know where it was going to take me. And it was really inspired. I think what started off, I was in lockdown. I also had writer's block for the first time ever. I sat there thinking, well, I don't really feel like writing. I don't know what to write about. And I took up jewellery making. So I was finding out about all different gemstones, about different types of different carats of gold. And of course, I looked at diamonds and precious stones. And when you're researching about, then I start to research about finding out about tourmaline or peridot or all these things. And I wanted to know what was the most famous diamond in the world, the most expensive diamond. And that led me on to the story of the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which is in the crown jewels. And of course, this is how I think it relates to a lot of my stories because of the social injustice of blood diamonds and how the Koh-i-Noor was stolen by Queen Victoria by deception from the then 10-year-old Julip Singh, the Maharaja at the time. And this diamond has a whole history of bloodshed behind it. So I wanted to bring that into the story. So as readers know, a lot of my stories are about social injustice as well as environmental injustice. And I think a lot of the themes wrap around each other with those themes. So it feels, I think when readers read it, it feels very different, but I think a lot of the themes that I've wound through are very similar.
Even the sort of anthropomorphic element is something that you shifted towards a little bit with A Street Dog Named Pup, and also the creation of a mythology for animals, so you'd kind of moved that way a little bit already.
Yes, I had. And if there's a sliding scale of anthropomorphism from one end where in most of my books, the animal stays as the animal and I don't give it a human voice. And then you can slide more towards the dogs in A Street Dog Named Pup, where the dogs are still dogs. They don't wear clothes. They don't go to markets or anything like that. So that's further down the scale. But they have their own mythology, which I love writing mythologies for different animal groups. I think it's really fascinating. And then sliding to the other scale with these rats, which are truly anthropomorphized to the fact that they're really humans thinly disguised as rats. But I love when, if you're creating a mythology or sort of those ceremonies around animals, that they value something, that's such a sort of lovely place to go into the imagination to do that, because you've got complete free will really to write about what you want and how you want to write it. There aren't any rules.
You've talked a little bit about the context of writing, and I know that lockdown period affected people differently. I was somebody who read voraciously. I was so delighted to have the time to do nothing but read and nobody sort of banging down the door because, people weren't at work. But equally, I knew people who couldn't read, and it surprised me. I hadn't even thought that would be a thing. So I'm sure it must have been the same for writers. As you've said, some would have been just happy to get on and do their writing. Maybe they didn't even notice much difference, in the pandemic. So that context, I wondered whether it also affected the way in which you approach the process of writing.
Definitely. This story was very different from my others. My other stories have to do an awful lot of research before I even start writing, because I have to know about the animal, the habitat, the human conflicts surrounding those stories. So I've already built up that world already. I know that world before I find my characters, and then the character finds its way through the story. But I often have an idea of how a story begins, sort of a few stations along the way, and how it ends. Whereas with this story, it really was standing beside Tilbury, who's the protagonist, and actually just going on this adventure. And I really didn't know where it was going at times. I'd sort of get to one point and think, well, what's going to happen next? And then new things happen. And it was an exciting way of writing, but it did mean that my very first draft, as I'm sure Liz Cross can count, I sent her a draft full of 150,000 words. And your average book for 8 to 12s is about 50 to 60,000 words. So we knew about 100,000 words had to be chopped. But I'd created so many different rat tribes, different rat groups. Things happened in different places. And it was this big sprawling adventure, which I had to, and Liz Cross is a fantastic editor. I remember I remember her first words, "Oh, I love the story, but I think we might need to lose some of it." And then, there's this big chopping scissors coming for the story. But it was a very interesting process, and I've learned a lot about my editing process through this story.
Really interesting. It seems to me like you were heading for Lord of the Rings territory there with the length of the book. I also wondered whether you were revisiting aspects of your childhood. I mean, certainly when I was growing up, I know the word, now it's not coming out, anthropomorphic animal stories were particularly popular. And I wondered whether you were visiting any specific books from childhood.
Certainly Watership Down, which was one of my all-time favourite books as a child, I think, and I love the mythology that Richard Adams creates with the rabbits. That's such a beautiful story and very impactful. But I think it even goes back further than that. And as a child, I couldn't sleep. It took me hours and hours to get to sleep. And I remember every night I'd have to tell myself a story, and it was invariably about being a mouse or something like that, going on this adventure down a river. And I'd get to one point in the story and then think, oh no, I don't want that to happen. And then I had to go all the way back to the beginning of the story and start telling it again until I got to that point, then something different would happen. So I think I was sort of editing in my head as a very sort of young child. But I remember having these stories where I was this little creature. As a child, that's what you want to be, isn't it? You want to be this little creature in this big world, and you're creating this world around you and seeing it in your imagination.
Interesting. Well, I think I've kept people waiting long enough. I think what they would like more than anything is to hear a bit of the story. And I know you're going to read the prologue to us, which will set things up nicely. So that would be great.
Yeah. So the prologue. The prologue is titled "The Seventh Born." It is a truth universally acknowledged that the seventh born rat of the seventh born litter is a rat in want of adventure. Tilbury Twitch Whiskers was no exception. He just didn't know it yet. Mrs. Twitch Whiskers, upon the birth of her seventh rat baby of her seventh litter, looked at the little squirming infant and wept salt tears, for he was so much smaller than all the others. His skin was so pale and thin that she could see his little pink heart beating inside his chest, and she never wanted that little heart to stop. So she announced to anyone that would listen that Tilbury was actually her eighth-born ratling, and that her seventh-born had been already taken by a marauding crow. Indeed, a marauding crow had taken nearly all of Mrs. Twitch Whiskers' seventh litter, except for little Tilbury and his fierce sister Nimblequick. Tilbury had entwined his tail around Nimblequick's, holding her tightly as she fought back against the crow. Maybe this was why Tilbury and his sister became so close, because they had clung to each other during this terrible moment and survived. Tilbury is my eighth-born ratling, insisted Mrs. Twitchwhiskers, but he has a weak heart and a weak chest and must stay with me. And no one challenged her on this, because it is also a truth universally acknowledged that a rat in want of adventure does not last very long in the world. Piers Piccadilly, the seventh-born rat of the seventh-born litter of Peter and Penelope Piccadilly, was accidentally swallowed whole by a seagull when he chewed his way into a discarded ice cream cone. Millicent Morden, the seventh-born rat of the seventh-born litter of Merryweather and Marylebone Morden, was struck by lightning when she tap-danced across the lead roof of St. Paul's. It was no surprise to find that Mrs. Twitchwhiskers forbade little Tilbury to venture to the outside world. In fact, she told him so many tales of all the terrible things that could befall him that it was no surprise either that Tilbury grew up to be a nervous little rat, scared of his own shadow. So he spent his days inside the chandlery of Tilbury Docks, and his little nose never smelled the outside air. He only ever saw the sky through the glass pane of a window. But an adventurous spirit cannot be contained, for if adventuring cannot be taken in the outside world, then the curiosity and imaginings of such a mind are turned inwards and can be the greatest beginning of some of the greatest adventures of all time.
Well, that certainly whetted my appetite there. And that last paragraph, but an adventurous spirit cannot be contained. For if adventure cannot be taken in the outside world, then curiosity and imaginings of such a mind are turned inwards and can be the beginning of some of the greatest adventures of all time. Clearly, you in the pandemic, that's that. It's also reading, isn't it?
Definitely. It's reading such a wonderful way to open a portal into another world and meet characters and go on adventures. And I think especially for many children, that's such a sort of magical way of going on these adventures. And I know that many children actually reading became quite a big thing with a lot of children during the pandemic to be able to go on those journeys.
Mm. Well, you've told us about bodyboarding today. So you're clearly somebody with an adventurous spirit. But I wanted to know a little bit more about the kind of adventurer you are. Are you an intrepid or a cautious explorer? How do you feel when you're having an adventure? Do you thrive in the moment, or do you prefer to tell stories about it after the event?
I think I'm definitely a little bit like Tilbury Twitchwhiskers in being quite nervous and cautious when I'm actually on the adventure. And then afterwards, it's fun to sort of relate the adventure afterwards. But I think I'm quite cautious, especially perhaps being a slightly older Tilbury Twitchwhiskers now. That caution kicks in, I think. Hence, today I didn't go out into the big waves. I stayed in the smaller waves today.
That was really my way of asking you whether Tilbury was sort of based on a little, a roundabout way of asking that, I guess.
I think there's a lot of Tilbury in me, definitely. I think that also wanting to be brave. I think we all feel we want to be brave, but when we're in the situation, we sometimes feel a little bit scared in our own shoes, I suppose, or in our own paws.
But it doesn't stop you, does it? I mean, you do push your boundaries. I think you have got that adventurous spirit. I've got to ask you, I mean, people who listen to that prologue will have that ringing in their ears, a truth universally acknowledged, Jane Austen. So where did Jane Austen come into this?
I'm going to have to be absolutely truthful here that I haven't read many classics actually, and it was the film of Emma with Gwyneth Paltrow that has got that quote, which comes in right at the beginning in this lovely sort of beginning vignette of the scene to the story, and it just sort of stuck in my head, and I just love the fact that we say it's a truth universally acknowledged, which feeds into a lot of the deeper themes in Tilbury, which is really a story about stories and how we often weave stories around ourselves, or we believe stories told about us that can stop us living our own true stories. And I think so when you put in it's a truth universally acknowledged, it's really saying we're not going to have any other story. This is the story we're all going to believe. So it's a truth universally acknowledged that, you know, you won't be able to achieve in life. It's sort of, then that sets a fixed mindset. So it does set up the story about whose story are we telling, what stories do we believe.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because just 4 words, I mean, they're brilliant. They're so memorable. And the irony is there right from the beginning. I don't think there's a single truth in the world that anybody universally acknowledges. You know, even, yeah, I mean, you just think about all the big debates at the moment and you think must be categorically true, and you will always find somebody that disagrees with you.
Absolutely. It's just, you know, I think we're as humans, we're made of stories, and it's trying to find the stories that we need to tell and want to tell as well.
Mm. I'd like to have a look at some of the illustrations actually, and use those as a point from which we can talk about some of the aspects of the story. And we're going to start, the illustrations are by Pippa Curnick. You must have been really pleased with them because I think they're fantastic.
They're absolutely, I mean, it's almost like Pippa could see inside my head, because I didn't want really cute rats, but she's given them such character, and the nasty rats look really nasty, and Tilbury looks very cute, but that's the bigger spreads that that's put throughout the book. I mean, there's lovely artwork which makes the book feel like a little piece of art rather than just a book. And she captures feeling, emotion. She captures that sense of adventure. Very talented. Yeah,
Let's
wonderful.
have a look at her portraits. I'm just going to take myself off so that we.
Okay. Oh, I can't see them at the moment. Oh, yes. So these are some of the portraits that Pippa has drawn for the characters. And I'll just run through some of these characters. We have Tilbury at the top, who is the protagonist. He's tiny little rat, as we know, the seventh born, and he's scared of his own shadow. And he has to go on a big, brave adventure, but he's a little bit scared. And if you look down just below him, there's Nimblequick, he's his sister, who has helped him fight the marauding crow when they're both little ratlings in the nest. And as you can tell, she's the brave one. She's got all the courage. But at the same time, they both need each other. Both Tilbury and Nimblequick need each other for the adventure. And if we let's go to the top, we have Marfair. Now, Marfair is one of the elders. Now, the elders are the rats which have the knowledge, which are supposed to have the wisdom, and they live in the attic rooms of the Tower of London. And they're very much worshipped and revered by all the rats. But they have their own desires and want for power as well. But Marfair becomes a guide for Tilbury. She's wise, she's just, she can see beyond some of the other elders' selfishness, and she's very important in Tilbury's adventures. And if we take a little look below, we have Yersinia, who, as you can tell, he's quite an evil rat. You can see this big tail spike, and he's quite cunning. He's double crossing. He's actually a guard. He's the tower guard of the elders. So he protects all the elders. But you can see that there's a little bit of a double crosser in him. So you might find a bit more about him in the story. And below him, we've got one of the ship rats who feature in the journey when they go across the seas. And the ship rats are actually some of my favourites in the story. We meet Wretch and Spew and Captain Spurious, who are the ship rats. And then we have Obsidian, who you can see to the side. Now, he's a golden rat from the City in the Clouds, and he is already in the Docklands, but he's been hidden with the underground rats. But he plays a very important part in the story. And then we have Little Rose, who again is a little bit further on in the story, so I don't want to tell too much about her, but she plays a very, very important part, and she's the one who really helps them to find the truth.
So, Jill, I wanted to ask, you didn't tell the story there about how you named Yersinia. Tell us that. I mean,
Yes.
that's just lovely.
So I had great fun naming them. So Yersinia is named after the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is a bacterium which causes the Black Death, or which has been a problem for centuries. So I wanted to have him as really quite an evil character coming in, and so he's Yersinia. And as I say, with the ship rats, we have Wretch and Spew and Captain Spurious. And further on in the story, there's a General Malice who comes into it. So it was really fun just playing around with words and with names. And I'm never sure quite where Tilbury came from, because he's obviously from Tilbury Docks. And that just sort of, being in Tilbury Docks just sort of was one of the first places that I walked into when I started imagining Tilbury's world. I'm not even sure I've been to Tilbury Docks.
I have many times. I wanted to ask you why rats became the creatures that you settled on for this story. I mean, there are some obvious reasons why, because rats are associated with seafaring, ship's rats and so on. And they're ideal, therefore, for an adventure on the high seas. I wondered whether there was anything else about this group of animals that made you settle on rats for your story.
Well, I think certainly I wanted a story which you've got a very small protagonist in a big world, so it was going to be something quite small. But rats are such interesting creatures. They're very like us. They're very fierce. They can be very fierce. They've got a lot of affection for each other, and actually rats have a lot of empathy for each other. And rats within one social group will help each other if one's drowning or something like that, or if there was an experiment where which I hate lab experiments, but I read about it, where there was a rat in a maze and another rat helped it out of this maze. So they help each other. They've got empathy for each other. But what I was really intrigued about is how our lives and rats have been very bound together through cities. Rats have always lived alongside us for our waste scraps and the warm buildings where we live. And the City of London, which has developed over the Thames over centuries, must have had the same sort of rat families and generations living alongside the Thames for centuries. So I built them into the Dockland rats. And then they've got their own ceremonies and belief systems. And it made me think as well, with all the ships that came into the docks, which have got lots of the sort of colonial terms such as East India docks, tobacco docks. These rats at the time must have gone onto the ships and gone across the sea to different countries and gone over to colonize different countries. And I think it's very similar to our human world, where that's happened as well, which is why, again, I wanted this stolen diamond to be brought from a different place to the Dockland rats world, where they find this cursed and stolen diamond.
Fascinating. My favourite rat fact that I discovered recently is that apparently rat is a banned word on the Isle of Man. Did you know that? You may not use the word rat. You have to use the word longtail instead of rat.
Oh, is that because has it got a bad luck on a ship or something?
Yeah,
You're not
bad
allowed
luck.
to say certain. You're not allowed to say pig, are you, on a ship, or rabbit? I think is rabbit you're not allowed to say on ships and things.
So
I didn't know that about the Isle of Man.
when the Boomtown Rats performed on the Isle of Man, apparently they had to call themselves the Boomtown Longtails. Anyway, there you go. We're going to have a look at another of Pippa's illustrations. The book is organised in a three acts, if you like. And there's some double page spreads that introduce each of those 3 acts. The first one is called The Docklands, and we're going to just have a quick look at that next. So let me.
Yes, I love this spread. This is where Tilbury lives with the other Tilbury Dockland rats, and Tilbury lives with his Ma and Pa and his 42 brothers and sisters in the old saggy sofa, which we can see just to the right there. And Aunt Swinny and Uncle Tubbs they're rather posh. They live in the doll's house, which has an electric battery lighting. So they feel very proud of living in the doll's house. And Lily May lives with her family in the wardrobe at the back with lots of mothballs and old clothes. And Cousin Jack lives in the trunk full of books at the back. And the Marmalade Paws is a significant character in the story as well. But just this spread really shows how beautiful Pippa Curnick's work is. And you can also see that it says A Tale of a Silkwing, The Cursed Knight, and a Gilded Cage. And in a minute, we'll be talking a little bit about that Cursed Knight and the Gilded Cage.
We will indeed. But before we get there, I noticed that in my edition of Moonflight, Marmalade Paws doesn't appear on that spread. Is there a story behind that?
There is. Well, that you were showing a picture from the draft, and then we realized that actually Marmalade Paws doesn't live up in the attic room, so we had to take him out. He lives right down in the basement of the chandlery at Tilbury Docks, and the basement is this, well, it's a basement, it's a room which has got lots of mechanical equipment, old cogs and wires and screws and lots of little sort of devices that actually inspires Tilbury's very inventive mind. He loves making things, he loves inventing. And the biggest thing that he really, really wants to invent is there's a legend of a silkwing, this amazing flying machine that one rat, the great Bartholomew, had created 200 years before. But the plans to the silkwing were lost. But there's the legend of it. So he and Nimblequick desperately want to be able to learn how to fly and to create a flying machine.
Should we just show people some of the internal pictures? We don't have slides of these, but if I just hold this up to the camera so that people can see it. What can you tell us is happening here?
So the picture that you're showing is when Tilbury is trying, and Nimblequick are trying to learn to fly. So she's got on a sort of wingsuit, a bird suit, and they haven't learned how to create power to get her to lift off from the ground. So Tilbury's created a catapult to catapult his sister up into the air, and then she opens her wings wide so she can glide rather than fall straight down. So she learns about gliding and about how to use the wind, how to use the air to give her lift. So all the time he's really trying to understand the mechanics of flight. And then later in the story we can see that there's a little bit more engineering going on with the plans to the silkwing.
And also on the back.
Yes.
Cover here. Just with that spread that we saw of the attic room, we can see where they've made their houses, in the doll's house, in the sofa. It just occurred to me when I was watching it that when I was looking at that, did you have in mind where you thought the humans are that inhabit this world?
So the humans are parallel to the rats. So the humans are living out their lives, but they don't notice that the rats are living their parallel lives and the humans don't notice them. And I think I've got some sections in the book which sort of describe about how the humans just don't see the rats. And Tilbury's mother is a seamstress, and she makes them these traveling cloaks which sort of go unseen by the human world, that make them look like sort of windblown paper, and that's how they scurry about completely unseen by humans, because there's a saying, isn't there, you're never more than 3 foot from a rat, and how often do you see a rat?
I was going to invite you to just read a second extract for us. It's quite a short one, but it gives us an opportunity to think about the Cursed Knight and the Gilded Cage.
Yes, so this section is when Tilbury is talking about the legend of the Cursed Knight, and also about the different battles between the rats. The golden rats and the Dockland rats fought many a battle, said the master. Every rat wanted the diamond for themselves. Its power turned rat against fellow rat and brought violence and greed. Bartholomew named the diamond the Cursed Night, for it was only then that he understood that his moonlight escape with the diamond had brought mortal danger to the Docklands. The master raised his voice up high. So Bartholomew made the gilded cage here, encased in this rock, and he placed the cursed night inside so that none could possess it. None could possess its power. He said one day there would come a warrior of wisdom and great ingenuity who could open the cage and return the diamond to its rightful owners. Then, and only then, could the Dockland rats be saved from its terrible, terrible curse.
So, Gill, I think you do have a gilded cage, don't you? With your own cursed knight.
I do indeed. So this is my little replica of the gilded cage. So we can see it's a cage of intricate locks. And within the cage, there's another gilded cage inside the gilded cage. And inside that is a black diamond, the cursed knight. And in the story, I wanted this cage to be inaccessible. So not only is it difficult to actually, no rat has, since the great Bartholomew 200 years ago, has been able to open this cage. Only Bartholomew knew the intricate locks and how to open it. But it's also deep beneath the wharf at Tilbury Docks, and it's covered by the tide, and it's only revealed at the lowest of low tides once a month. And that's when the rats have got chance to be able to open the cage and see if they're the warrior, they're the one, the chosen one, to be able to take the cursed night and return it to its rightful owners. And so once a month, at the full moon, at the lowest of low tides, all the rats gather in a ceremony called the darkening, when each rat is allowed to, each year-old rat is allowed to see if they're the chosen one to unlock it.
It's beautiful.
And
you made that.
yeah, so it's made from this was following on from my jewelry designing, but this is it's actually made from gold wire, and we have aquamarine. I think it's aquamarine, and inside it's not actually a black diamond; it's black zircon, because that would make it just that little bit expensive.
Wonderful. So there's a bit of King Arthur going on there as well, with the sword in the stone and who's the kind of chosen one, all those kind of age-old legends.
Definitely, yeah.
There's also something else here. I mean, there's a quote in the book, I won't say where it's from, but Obsidian says at one point, the value we give, talking about the Cursed Night, the value we give it is of our own making. The stories we tell about it hold our own hopes and fears, but the diamond itself holds neither a curse nor a prophecy. And there's a lot in this story about what we give value to. And of course, we can think about that in our terms as humans. And that takes me back a little bit to a previous novel that you've written, Gorilla Dawn. Same sort of idea coming through there.
Yes, well, I think it's really, when I was thinking about the diamond, I was thinking about first of all, that was inspired, as I say, by the Koh-i-Noor diamonds that had this sort of long and bloody history. And I was thinking, well, who does this diamond belong to? Because so many different people from different countries claim it as their own. So Britain won't give it up. India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan have claimed this diamond. And it makes me think, well, actually, who was the first person to have pulled this diamond from the ground, from the sand, where it had been, and who had been the first person to hold it in their hand, and they'd had to give it up to somebody for want of power. And very similarly, in one of my novels, Gorilla Dawn, that's about mining for coltan in the Democratic Republic of Congo, about a sort of mineral, and those minerals are expensive for their use. Coltan is expensive for its use within sort of computers and technology. But again, we've got this sort of blood coltan because so many people have been exploited. We've had forests which have been cut down for the mining. Whereas in this story, we've got a diamond which has no intrinsic value of being able to be used in a sort of a computer, or it has no function, but it's this emblem of power. And when I felt the diamond, I felt this, if that's huge diamond they're being picked up from the sand, and all these different stories have been woven around it, different claims to it. And it's those stories which give this diamond its intrinsic power, that people have wanted it so much for themselves. And with the Koh-i-Noor diamond, there's a supposed curse on the Koh-i-Noor that no male member of the royal family will wear it. Only female members will wear it. So you think even in the real world, there are these powerful stories that create what people believe is a curse, whether or not you believe a curse or not. So I find it fascinating, the stories we wrap around things which intrinsically, what's the difference between a diamond and another rock you find in the ground? It's just a bit more sparkly, really.
I'm going to open the Q&A, so if anybody has got questions, do pop them in there. So I'm just opening that now. And we've got so much more that we want to talk about. So I'm going to go straight to Pippa's the second spread, which is the journey. And
yes, the journey. Now, Nikki, I can't hear you at the moment, but this story was one of my favourite parts of Moonflight. As you can see, a tale of sea shanties, seasickness, an immortal emperor, and the White Death. And I love this image. We can see an awful lot here. We can see in the back, we can see Tilbury Docks and the Docklands. We can see that Tilbury is on a ship. He's there with Obsidian and Marfair. And we can see these rather evil-looking rats with these sort of rather pirate headbands coming down. And Tilbury's got to work out how to keep safe from the ship rats. And with the sea shanties, that's been quite inspired by, I've joined a local sea shanty group, which has been great fun, actually. And I was very honoured that I had a live launch in a village near here, and the sea shanties all dressed up as rats and sang the sea shanty in Moonflight.
So, of course, Gill, I'm going to invite you to sing a sea shanty.
You might realise that everybody actually leaves at this point.
They won't.
And I do point out that actually the whole point of the rats is that they sing sea shanties really badly. So obviously I'm just trying to sing really badly when I'm singing. I've obviously got a much better voice. Right, so I shall sing you a sea shanty. So this is your typical ship rat. I hope you see I've got my pirate ship rat on here. I won't sing all the chorus so that otherwise we might lose people. But so this sea shanty comes when Tilbury is watching the dock slip. He's on the boat. He's watching the dock slip further and further away. He's leaving his home for the very first time. He's only got Marfair and Obsidian. He wants to ask them questions, but they're deep in their own thoughts. And he's thinking, how big is the sea and how deep? And how do we know where we're going? And will we ever come back at all? And he doesn't have any answers from Marfair or Obsidian, but he hears an answering call from somewhere above him. And it's a ship rat singing. Excuse me. Say farewell to the land, ho, one last kiss to your family. You'll not be back for a long time yet if you ever come back at all. Hey ho, and off we go on the rolling waves on the fathomless sea. Hey ho, and off we go, it's a ship rat's life for me. Land lubber, 'tis best not eat when the sea's so rough and restless. 'Tis a waste of good fine food to say hello again to your breakfast. Hey ho, and off we go on the rolling waves on the fathomless sea. Hey ho, and off we go, it's a ship rat's life for me. 'Twill take 3 days of pitch and toss, 3 days of wretch and spew. Then when you find your sea legs, you'll become a ship rat too. Hey ho, and off we go on the rolling waves on the fathomless sea. Hey ho, and off we go, it's a ship rat's life for me. Fare thee well to my old life, come wind, fill these sails and blow. Oh, ship ride these tempests, o'er the bottom of the sea we go. Squeak, squeak, squeak.
Do you know that's got to be the best thing that has ever happened in a book launch before? That's just amazing. So
Well, you can sing along next time.
We've got some questions actually. So I'm just going to, seems to be a bit of a issue with your image in the stream. So I'm just going to remove you and add you again, and hopefully that will work. Yeah, okay.
I think my sea shanty must have done something to it's that bad.
We've got some questions actually, so I'm going to add them to the screen, and the first one is from Julia, and okay, here it is. Your title, Moonflight, is this a deliberate echo of the story Moonfleet?
Actually, somebody did ask me this question, and I'm very embarrassed that I have never read Moonfleet. We were actually I was trying to come up with a title. My working title was The Remarkable Life and Times of Tilbury Twitch Whiskers, which was just too long and needed to be short and snappy. And we were trying, Liz Cross and the David Fickling team were trying to come up with a title, and it was just, nothing was quite hitting the mark. And then I remembered that I went for a walk one lovely, beautiful night, and the moon was so bright, and the clouds were sort of shining with this beautiful light on top of the clouds. And I just had this image of Tilbury flying high above the clouds in the moonlight, just on fleeing, and that image stuck. And so then I said to Liz Cross, what about Moonflight? And then we said, yeah, that's the one.
Great. I'm just waiting for more questions to come into the Q&A, but I've got plenty more while we're waiting for those, Jill. So I would invite anybody that wants to ask Jill a question, please do pop it into the Q&A, and we will put those questions on the screen. Oh, here's another one. How about that? Just like magic, it appears. So this is Andrew, and he says, you mentioned you learned a lot about your own editing processes while writing the book. What do you feel you learned, even with all your writing experience? And what advice do you have for someone editing a first book?
Yes. I've been published now for nearly 10, 12 years, and I still feel I'm on this really steep learning curve all the time. And I think editing, well, first of all, when I first started writing and I went on the Bath MA course, I thought editing was a quick spell check, and it just went through and changed a few little things. And of course, that was such a big thing to realize that actually you're constantly changing everything, changing your characters, molding the story. And I've learned lots of different. I used to try and be more particular about the story and get the sort of first few chapters correct and then go back and then write again. But now I tend to just hurtle straight forward on my computer. And my writing, you almost can't tell what some of the words are because I don't even take time to spell the words correctly. And I try to really rattle through, get all that energy down. And then I go back to edit. And of course, it'll be a big edit. It'll be thinking, well, actually, I only wrote part of the story because I needed to find out about that one character. So you can take out that whole chunk of a story that's not neat, that isn't needed now. So I have learned a lot about editing, but I think advice for writers or new writers or children or anybody that's starting out, I think for me it's to trust in the story, to get the energy of the story down, but not to be scared about doing big edits at the end, because your work will be a lot better at the end of it. I hope it sounds a bit waffly advice, because I think the problem is it's so different for ever be, because some people find that they like to edit as they go along, and that works for them. But for me, it's that big sprawl and then tidying it up at the end.
Here's a question from Philippa. Will Tilbury
Will
have
Tilbury? Oh, I hope so. I think if it's going to be another story, I've got a feeling it's going to be Nimblequick's story next, because she's such an adventurous character and she loves going on adventures. She doesn't want to stay confined in the Dockland world. She's got her sights elsewhere. So I hope there will be.
Fantastic. So we haven't got any more questions at the moment. I'll keep the Q&A open for a little while longer in case there are some more questions coming in. But I just have another one. In fact, I have loads here, but I'm not going to get the opportunity to ask all of them. So I'm going to skip forward to a part of the story which we won't perhaps give too much context around it, but a white tiger is part of this story. And I know that you used to be a large animal vet. And when I read the passage describing the tiger, I mean, it's just so evocative. The tiger's stripes were a dark chocolate brown against the white fur, but it was the tiger's eyes that fascinated him. They were bright blue, the colour of a clear mountain sky. They held mountains and whole landscapes within them. And for a moment it felt as if Tilbury was on the tip of a mountain, feeling the freezing air. And I got such a feeling that there's more to this passage. That's just a short extract, but such an incredible sense of respect for this animal. And I wondered whether your work had ever brought you into contact with tigers.
It has. No wild tigers. I haven't seen a wild tiger, but I remember working in Zambia, which Africa doesn't have. Obviously, it doesn't have tigers, but somebody had rescued a tiger from a zoo and they kept it in this very flimsy cage, actually, which was open top. But I think whenever I see a zoo animal, I'm not a fan of zoos at all. And whenever you see a zoo animal, you just see, especially such an iconic creature, the tiger, you see such a powerful, incredible animal diminished within concrete walls. And it seems to me so disrespectful to keep them in such a place. And then if you do look into their eyes, you just sense that there's this whole, you sense that there's this, obviously if a tiger hasn't been born in the mountains, it doesn't know what it's like, but you feel like the whole history through the DNA of this tiger belongs somewhere else. And for me, when I was writing about this tiger in the story, and the tiger is held in a cage by the rats, so that's a little bit like us puny humans, keeping this majestic animal, and it sort of lives in its own filth. It's that feeling that I wanted to put about really my thoughts about keeping captive animals. That's where that idea came from.
We've got one more question, and I'm going to close the Q&A because you are going to read us out of the event tonight. But let's have Simon's question first. Right. So for a book, I'm sure people could read it for themselves. For a book about rats, I think the book tells us so much about humanity. How aware were you of creating parallels with modern human politics, attitudes, and world affairs?
Yes, I think I was quite aware of doing this, especially the rats are very symbolic of us humans. The elders were really based on the House of Lords, and I placed them in the Tower of London, but they're these, I felt these older rats which are supposedly revered but actually have their eyes on the power. I wanted to explore sort of colonialism and stolen diamonds and the stories we weave around those diamonds, and what we believe. And it's really a story about stories, about creating narratives for our convenience, the narratives we push on others that they believe. And really it's about finding the truth within all the stories. And I wanted Tilbury to explore finding the truth of his own story as well as the bigger story as well.
So Gill, as you know, there was so much more that I wanted to talk to you about and we haven't got there. But can I just give you a last moment in case there's anything that you desperately wanted to mention and we haven't given you the opportunity to?
Oh, no, it's been an absolute pleasure to write Moonflight, just to be able to go on this incredible sort of journey of the imagination, which I haven't really been able to do with my other books because they've been very sort of fact-based. But just to explore the world of stories and the world of the truth as well.
Okay, so we're going to have a readout. Gill, I'll leave you to set the context and I'm going to put an illustration up to accompany your reading.
So I think the illustration that we're going to see in a moment didn't make it into the book. This was a sort of preparatory illustration by Pippa Curnick when she'd read one of this scene that I'm about to read out. And as you can see, these are the elders, and they're at a ceremony which is called the Moon Feast. And the elders at this stage, they've seen that they want to get their paws on the cursed knight, on the Black Diamond. And they're very eager to take it off little Tilbury. And they're celebrating because they now have access to the cursed knight. But all is not as it seems, because there are others that want the cursed knight as well. You can see some of these little rats in the corner with their rather evil-looking eyes. And Marfair is sitting next to Tilbury, and Marfair can tell that something's about to change. All is not as it seems. And Marfair has taught Tilbury to filter out the noise, to really concentrate on what is happening in the room. Tilbury, said Marfair, do not react. Do not appear as if I'm talking to you, but I want to settle your mind. Look beyond what you can see. Hear between the sounds and tell me what you feel. Tilbury reached for a piece of cheese and nibbled the corner, trying not to react to Marfair. His thoughts wouldn't settle, as Marfair's words had unsettled him. But he forced himself to try. He pushed those worries into the base of his tail and tried to still his unquiet mind. The talk and clink of bowls and cutlery faded into the distance. The moving jaws and paws reaching for food became background to Tilbury's vision. And the room took on a different feel. The elders were engrossed in food and drink and idle chatter. But Tilbury noticed a shift in energy in the room. 2 rats of the tower guard were standing by the long table with trays of food. They stood stiffly, the tips of their tails twitching ever so slightly. They gripped the edges of the trays they carried a little too tightly. He noticed they were in sightline with Yersinia on the other side of the table. Then Tilbury saw it. An almost imperceptible glance from Yersinia with the 2 guards. It was not one of expected attention. It was one of collusion. Something's not right, whispered Tilbury. It feels as if something is planned, as if something's going to happen. Marfair nodded. Then I did not imagine it. What? Whispered Tilbury. What's going to happen? Elder Pauncher plunged his head between Marfair and Tilbury. What are you 2 whispering about? Marfair forced a smile. I was just telling Master Tilbury about the time my great-aunt outwitted the banded bandits of Belgravia. Oh, there are better stories to tell him, said Pauncher, swigging another glass of wine and pushing himself between them. Why, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was the general who led the charge at Bakerloo. Now there's a fine tale to tell. And so Tilbury spent the rest of the moon feast having to listen to Elder Pauncher's drunken tales of chivalry and daring do. He managed to filter out Pauncher's droning voice and settled his mind to see beyond the superficial layers of elder etiquette and notice what was really happening in the room. Ting, ting, ting. Elder Elreth tapped his glass of wine with a spoon. Good evening, my fine fellow elders and rats of the Docklands. As we come to the end of this moon feast, let us raise a glass to young Tilbury here, for soon the ebbing tide will reveal the cursed night, and Tilbury will bestow it into our safe keeping. The other elders and the Dockland rats raised their glasses. Hear, hear, said Elder Pauncher. Yersinia clapped his paws together, and 2 rats came forward carrying trays. One rat carried a large pot of coffee, its rich aroma rising with its steam into the air. Then Tilbury saw the rat behind him was his own brother, Elbury. Elbury carried a huge tray piled high with chocolates wrapped in bright metallic foils. Yersinia bowed his head to Elder Elrith. For a special night, we have sourced your very favourite chocolate liqueurs from the food hall at Harrods. The best quality chocolate filled with Jamaican rum, Portuguese port, and Speyside whiskey. There were little whoops of delight from the elders and a buzz of excitement, for the elders were well known for their fondness for fancy food from their favourite food hall. Elbury carried the tray of chocolates high above his head. "Not for you," hissed Elbury, his eyes sliding over Tilbury. "These are for the elders. You're too young for liqueurs." "All the more for us," chortled Pauncher. Rich dark coffee was poured too in tiny silver thimbles. Tilbury's mind seemed to see everything in slow motion. He saw a flicker of a glance between Yersinia and Elbury. He saw greedy elder paws reaching out for the chocolates. Elder Pauncher beside him snuck 2 more liqueurs beneath his napkin and guzzled them down. Tilbury saw a tweak of a smile on Yersinia's mouth. Not a smile of contentment, but one of embittered hatred. He wanted to warn Martha not to eat the chocolates, and he felt relieved to see she had left hers untouched. She sipped her coffee instead, and Tilbury could see her eyes lock briefly with Yersinia. It was a moment of change. A sudden squall of wind gusted through the window and blew out the candles on the table, the smoke rising up from the burned wicks like grey ghosts in the dim light. Groans and moans and gasps came from the elders. Elder Pauncher was the first to fall. One paw outreached for another chocolate. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he toppled forwards, his mouth slack and a dribble of rum leaking from his mouth. "Pauncher?" said another elder, getting to her feet, but she too swayed sideways and fell to the floor, her head hitting the wood with a thud. Elder Elrith stared at the chocolate in his paw. He turned to Yersinia, and seeing Yersinia's leering grin, Elrith's face changed from one of confusion to understanding and then to terror. Elrith too stumbled back and collapsed. His tail twitched twice, and then he was still. One by one, all the elders were falling. Tilbury turned to Marfair, who was crouched beside Pauncher. She felt his neck. "He's dead." She turned to Tilbury. "Oh, Master Tilbury, I thought we would have more time. You must be brave. Do you understand me?" "But I'm not brave," squeaked Tilbury, clutching his tail. "Oh, my dearest Tilbury," whispered Marfair urgently, "you are braver than you think. You must believe it so." Her eyelids drooped, and she stumbled forward. "You didn't eat the chocolate, did you?" said Tilbury. "No," said Marfair, but she clutched at her throat and started to sway. She tried to stand again, but slumped on the floor. She stared at Yersinia, who was walking over, kicking at Pauncher's dead body on the way. "Marfair," squeaked Tilbury, "don't die." But Marfair's tongue lolled sideways, and she gasped to breathe. Her legs twitched, but she couldn't stand up. Yersinia stood over her. "You're not so clever as you think, Marfair," he laughed. "I didn't just poison the chocolates. I poisoned the coffee too."